welcome to this webinar on organizational mindfulness. As you'll be familiar, mindfulness has come into the public consciousness through the clinical route, and therefore has really had a focus on individual benefit. But if we look at mindfulness in the workplace, very few of us work on our own. Most people who are champions of mindfulness in the workplace presumably have colleagues to be champions too. A lot of the sort of problems and the performance of organizations is perhaps best understood at a group level. And also, human beings are best understood at sort of multiple levels. I mean, in one of Mark, our presenter, we'll introduce in a moment, gave a presentation recently where he talked about us being bio-psycho-social beings, and so it's important to consider these different layers of our being and bring social, particularly, into the consideration of mindfulness training. No better place than the workplace to kick off that conversation, because we are so embedded in our teams and our cultures there. So we have three speakers. Mark is going to speak first, then Jutta, and then Andrew. So Mark Leonard is director of I've deleted the name of your organization. Give me 1 second. Mark Leonard is director of Mindfulness Connected and a strategic partner in the management consultancy Talik Co. He helped to set up the Oxford University Mindfulness Centre. Was one of the first to adapt the Frantic World course, or not the first to adapt it, the Frantic World book into a workplace training program. Has moved that further into a new program called Mindfulness-Based Organizational Education, which looks at social mindfulness, and has piloted this with the NHS hospital and has published the results of that intervention in the journal Mindfulness. Mark's going to particularly look at the kind of broad lens of mindfulness in a social perspective. Following on from Mark, we're going to have Jutta Tobias, a long-time advisor to the Mindfulness Initiative. She is now a senior lecturer at City University and a founder of their Centre for Excellence in Mindfulness Research. So Jutta has applied her academic rigor across various applications of mindfulness in the workplace, and contributed to the Building the Case for Mindfulness in the Workplace document published in 2016, particularly on collective mindfulness and what that might mean. And since then, the conversation has developed further. So welcome, Jutta. And then finally, Andrew McNeill, my close colleague, workplace policy lead at the Mindfulness Initiative and a projects advisor, also helped to establish this very community. He's the author of a book on organizational mindfulness, a how-to guide, and recently was appointed co-director of the British Association of Mindfulness-Based Applications, BAMBA. He's also a consultant offering training and advice on mindfulness programs, before which he was a senior leader in the civil service for 20 years. Senior leader for 20 years, largely in the UK civil service, and most recently was director on the building safety program, which was set up immediately after the Grenfell fire tragedy. So he's going to really give us some really practical things that we can take away from his experience being a senior leader, trying to do that difficult work of taking mindfulness out of the individual lens and start to use it in teams in a group kind of intervention context. So I think we're going to look at sort of social, collective, and some team-based takeaways together here. So I'm going to pass over now to Mark, take it away, Mark. I will just enable screen sharing if that's necessary. Yes, over to you, sir.
I need you to give me screen share.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out how to do that.
Okay, great. We are here.
Thank you so much for joining us, Mark. And
Yeah, thank you. Lovely to be here. And I'm just going to, there we are. I've a short presentation. First of all, thank you for inviting me, Jamie and Andrew. Lovely to be here. I'm going to try and give you an overview of what I think are the different ingredients of mindfulness practice or mindfulness meditation, how we need to think about it in a social way. And of course, this is really what's important in organizations. So that's so how mindfulness works in organizations. So we need to understand, first of all, a little bit about how the human mind works if we're going to think about what mindfulness is and how it works. I think there are three parts to the human mind. You know, there's the thinking part, there's the emotions part, and there's the sort of physical body stuff. And each one of these, you know, parts of our mind interacts with an environment, you know, our cultural language, our cultural experience and our language, you know, our emotions, our intimate, familiar social environment primarily, and it can be in a less, you know, obviously more antagonistic context as well, and the physical environment. So our mind, you know, organizes and, you know, integrates the physiological, the emotional and thinking parts of our experience. The default mode network, it's all about the connections in our brains that make us human. It's got these special characteristics of symbolic processing of ideas, and it's the neurobiological basis of the self. It tells us stories about who we are. It's about the self-reference of who we are, connecting our emotions to who we are. It helps us to think about others, and it's thinking about others that we can also think about ourselves and start to build sort of a sense of what is right or wrong, or how we should act in relationships, how we feel about relationships, and even who's got power, who's got status, and how should I respond to that with my assessing my own status, imagining who I am. It's also about the thinking about things, planning, remembering, and piecing together a story of what is going on for us. The trouble is, our brains are not made to spend so much time problem solving as we do today. This becomes a problem with goal-oriented tasks. And this is why mindfulness has become so popular or in our societies, because we've spent so much time thinking about getting things done rather than the processes, the parts of the human life that we need to invest in that are about, you know, play, bonding, connecting with people, feeling stuff that's not directed at a goal. If the mind is overactive, we can't focus on a task. We need to reconnect with our feelings and think clearly. Now, that's why mindfulness started to move into the workplace, to help people be more focused and improve their performance. So we need to reconnect with those feelings, the people around us, and to be aware of our feelings, to think clearly. And this is mindfulness, if you like, is going to help us do that, not just in terms of our physiological calming, but also in our relationships. This network, the default mode network, deactivates when we focus on a goal-oriented task. And if we're too distracted, we can't focus. And interestingly, our capacity to focus, if we're not good at deactivating it, that interferes with our cognitive functions, and it's behind a lot of mental health problems. That inability to deactivate this storytelling mechanism. We need to understand how we create a sense of self, because it's this network that is creating the sense of self, describing who we are. The way we are made, we've spent somewhere between 4 and 8 million years walking around in bipedal groups, as bipedal apes in groups, learning to care for each other, share things and cooperate, which has enabled us to rear children into their teenage years. And we've developed loving, intimate relationships that last lifetimes in order for us to to be able to do that. This is our essential nature. And without honoring this, we end up in problems. Around 40,000 years, well, between 50 and 60,000 years, we created this capacity to have imaginary ideas that come from an imaginary world. This is the oldest image of an imaginary being. It's the Lion Man from Stardal, Holston Stardal. It holds a tribe together, and it was our capacity to hold tribes together that enabled us in 40,000 years ago to displace the Neanderthals, who are much better evolved for northern European climates, but we could organize ourselves. They were no match for large clans or tribes of humans that could hold themselves together with imaginary symbolic objects. Today, we have corporations, nations, and money. All of these things are imaginary things that we use to organize ourselves. But there's a cost to organize ourselves in large groups. There's not just the challenges we have to our humanness. We're so successful at what we're doing, we're causing all sorts of problems, and we need to deal with this problem, deal with the effects of our over-organizing and our over-conceptualizing, over-planning how to run the world. We're not evolved for modern life, and it shows. You know, the ancient hunter-gatherers still alive today, a few, you know, they live in small groups, they're emotionally secure. They very rarely experience a sense of threat, and when they do, it could be life-threatening. It's going to be infrequent and unpredictable, very short-term. But in modern society, we have a stressful experience. We have a kind of continual threat to a sense of self-worth. We're always worried if we're good enough. It's a lot of the time, it's frequent and it's predictable. We know when we've got to get a deadline in. We know when we've got to pay the bills. We set a task to, you know, get a qualification, get a better job. And we see ourselves as separate psychological individuals. We were evolved as hunter-gatherers. We didn't see ourselves like that. It's very hard for us to imagine what it must have been like to have lost that sense of separate self and be merged with a sense of connection to the group and the natural environment. And naturally, there's a problem with mental health. 1 in 4 adults in society experience at least one mental health problem or diagnosable mental health problem in a year. The causes of distress are more to do with social conditions than to do with individual weakness. Clinical psychologist David Smale believes this idea of the separate psychological individual self is a big mistake, and it's behind many of our problems. Placing responsibility on the individual for their well-being and their self-improvement. This is an experience related by an author, Andrew Solomon, in Rwanda, and he's talking to a Rwandan after the genocide. And I'll read to you what the Rwandan says to Andrew Solomon after he asked what the problem was. The Rwandan said, "They came and their practice did not involve being outside in the sun where you begin to feel better. There was no music or drumming to get your blood flowing again. There was no sense that everyone had taken the day off so that the entire community could come together to try to lift you up and bring you back to joy. There was no acknowledgement of the depression as something invasive and external that could actually be cast out again." He paused meaningfully. Instead, they would take people one at a time into these dingy little rooms and have them sit around for an hour or so and talk about bad things that had happened to them. We had to ask them to leave. Intimacy, holding hands, shares out the pain. If you put someone in a brain scanner and give them an electric shock, parts of their brain will light up that register that pain. If they're holding the hand of a loving partner, the amount of activation is reduced. So is their experience, their subjective experience of pain is reduced. Now, if you put the partner in the brain scanner and you give and they're holding the hand of the person that's getting the electric shock outside the brain scanner, their brains too will light up with a registering a sense of pain. It's sharing that pain. We're merging our sense of self. You know, our experience, and specifically pain in this context, has got social as well as psychological and biological factors that result in it. Many hands make light work. Things are easier when we work together and we share the results of that work. If you ask someone to estimate the steepness of a hill, they'll estimate it to be steeper if they're on their own than with a friend. And the conclusion is that we share a sense of self with those we identify with. We expand our sense of self to others in the same group so that we can work for the collective good, because that's how humans work. We can't be continually competing with each other. We have to work together to feel happy and to achieve what we can do collectively in a team. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about this idea of social mindfulness in organizations and how I've gone about shaping this idea. So it's got 3 domains. It's not just mindfulness. They're all related and they're all connected. So we can teach each 3 of these areas at the same time. We're not just teaching people to pay attention to sensations of breath or whatever, because this experience of mindfulness helps us understand our sense of self. We can explain how that happens and how we've created a sense of self, and how creating a sense of self causes a sense of bias and self and other, and how that affects decision making and creates many of the issues and the challenges that we're seeing in discrimination. Being able to see that and gives us a power to choose. We're more able to build cooperative groups. Being able to apply awareness to our body-based feelings gives us the capacity to feel what it's like for other people, to generate our sense of relatedness, to see how other people work and connect with them, realizing we're just like other people, so we can connect and work together more effectively. And of course, there's the mindfulness practice itself, which is regulating emotions and developing awareness of our feelings, as well as being able to step back from our thoughts, which enables us to think more clearly. But they're supported by these regulation, the emotional connection of regulation of people we're connected to, and understanding why we're doing it and how we're doing it. So the sense of self expands to include others when we're present with them, and understanding things helps us to make sense of what's going on, and describing the language of what's going on helps us to see that. And that's how we create action that's purposeful. We can act in a group, we can bring the group together, and this gives us collective agency. When we work together, we can achieve great things. So you need a critical mass in any group, and in an organization, you need a critical mass. This study shows that you need a critical mass of 25% to get a mass, to trigger a shift. This study, I think, is looking more at people deciding to speak out against sexist language. We need to build those critical mass in an organization to get shifts take place. This is just some results. I'm running out of time of our recent program we've just done as an organizational intervention for the UK Green Building Council, and we've had some lovely findings. So I won't go through those now because I think my time is up. So thank you very much. I don't know if we're going to do questions and answers, but I will stop sharing now.
Thank you so much, Mark. That was very professional timekeeping indeed. Yes, we will do question and answers, but if it's okay with you, Mark, we're going to do them all together at the end. For sure. If you have questions for Mark already, if you could put them in the chat for me privately, rather than the whole group at this point and distracting everyone from the other presenters. But if there's something you want to get down whilst it's on your mind, put it into the chat for me privately, and then I'll sort of work out how to manage those when we get to that point. Okay, so at this point, I will hand over to Jutta. Thank you, Jutta. So we have a little over 10 minutes for you, and I'm starting the timer now.
You know me so well, Jamie. Can you all hear me okay? Can I? Yeah, fantastic. Super cool. I don't have any slides because Jamie and I are old friends, and old friends are having honest conversations with each other. So I have effectively one example, one thing I'd like to chew through with you. And that should hopefully get us to have a bit of a discussion. My starting point about organizational mindfulness is I'm approaching mindfulness from a behavior change perspective. So that means that mindfulness as a state or as a way of being, as Jamie often talks about mindfulness, and that mindfulness state is the outcome or the goal of my work. And so in the work that I do, I train senior government leaders in mindfulness through the Cabinet Office's Project Leadership Program. Andrew knows this really well, and we've trained more than 1,000 senior leaders in considering how to bring mindfulness into their organizations. And I make the distinction between mindfulness as a state and mindfulness as a practice, because that allows me to open up the discussion about what practices can actually generate mindfulness. And that also opens up already the other point that I would like to bring to you today, that there are different mindfulness practices that can generate mindfulness, and mindfulness meditation is not necessarily the same as mindfulness as a state or way of being or as an outcome. And so you might already notice a little bit that my goal in talking to you is a little bit about opening up something, maybe also opening up different perspectives on the good knowledge that we all have about mindfulness. I have a particular perspective, and I would like to hear your perspective, and let's see how we can generate more awareness about all the possibilities that we have about mindfulness in organizations. So as I've said, if we're saying that meditation is only one way of many ways to generate mindfulness in organizations, then we need to look at the science that says, what are all these ways that generate mindfulness in teams and in organizations? And so there are some sickeningly smart researchers, especially in the US, mindfulness scientists in the last few years, such as Ravi Kudesia, who's a very well-versed mindfulness practitioner. He is a Buddhist, but that's neither here nor there. He is well published in the leading management science journals, and him and his colleagues are arguing that the mindfulness in organizations is metacognition or metacognitive practice. And in plain English, metacognitive practice means nothing more than when I am mindful at work, I'm aware of how I think, feel, and act. And I'm aware of what you, and I'm looking at you now, watching you, what you think, what you might feel, and how you might act. And I understand it. And I can make sense of it rather than being freaked out by it. And that's really important for mindfulness in organizations, because if you think about the opposite of this complex word, mindfulness, metacognition, which means just being aware of what's going on, it's being not aware of how I come across. It is being compelled to keep talking for more than 10 minutes, right? Or to, almost be under the influence of my inner dialogue and then miss or misinterpret what's going on. And that's really terribly difficult in organizations. So now, if we're saying, right, mindfulness in organizations is metacognition. And by the way, the word cognition is a bit of a misnomer, because in psychology, when we talk about cognition, we know it's based largely on beliefs and attitudes, and they're evaluative judgments. So this is all precognitive, and that means that all these things that are going on inside my brain are happening before I can even switch my thinking machine on. So a lot of stuff is unconscious, and it is the realm of feelings, emotions, senses, and urges. And that's really important for the way we relate to each other in organizations. And so if we want to get this metacognition, this awareness, as John Kabat-Zinn says, mindfulness is awareness, and John Kabat-Zinn is the godfather of most of what we know in mindfulness. Then the crucial question becomes, how do we develop this awareness of me, of you, of me and you, and the space between me and you? And that, it turns out, especially in the last few years of publications in the top management science journals on mindfulness, this metacognition is developed in organizations more likely through interventions where people are becoming aware of their beliefs, where people are becoming aware of the situation more so, and aware of like reappraising the situation and learning to reappraising or to reinterpret what's going on right now, rather than their individual self-regulative capacity. And so if you remember what I said at the beginning, meditation is largely internally focused, self-reflective capacity. And the evidence and the scientific evidence on mindfulness meditation interventions in organizations is not as firm as many of us, including myself, would like it to be, especially when we compare meditation interventions in organizations to other active control conditions. And by active control conditions, I mean conditions where a meditation intervention was put alongside a health education program, or alongside a program where people were allowed to job craft. That means they were allowed to give choice over how they did their work. And so we're now, as mindfulness researchers, starting to say, so what are these ways to develop this awareness in order for me to be flexible, to not be fixed, to not be hijacked by my own inner dialogue, by my own inner truth. And boy, do we need to see the truth for other people right now? Do we need to move away from the one and only truth that I think I have in my head, right? This is what I mean by metacognition, by being flexible, by being open-minded, right? And so this is about understanding beliefs and judgments and impressions, and understanding where they come from, and then understanding how to change them, because we're interested in changing behavior in organizations. Are you still with me? Is this still okay to see? This is kind of, I'm coming to the end of my intro and my framework of what I would like to try out with you, right? So we're talking about making ourselves nimble about the drivers for how I speak, how I think, and how I feel, right? And so another very, very clever team of researchers recently have defined what team mindfulness is all about. Mindfulness, in the interpersonal space. And what they found is that team mindfulness is nothing more than collective stress management. It is very, very related to conflict management. So if you think that when you have a task conflict at work, when you have a problem at work, if the team is not mindful, the conflict becomes ugly. And this is what typically happens when people are fixed in their mind, right? When people become defensive. So problems in teams that are not mindful become personal. Tasks that are stressful become about fighting matches. So people start to undermine each other. People start to deflect attention. Remember, mindfulness is a lot about awareness of where my attention is directed. When a team is not mindful, it means a conflict becomes a personal shouting match. On the contrary, mindful teams are teams that can remain calm in the face of difficulty, that can remain curious and careful and kind to each other, even though they're getting stressed. But how do you translate this individual mindful practice and move it into the interpersonal realm that is a mindful team? And this is the crux of the work that I do, and I do this with senior leaders in the military. And the things that we are trialing out and that we are now seeing start to work is by systematically reversing this unconscious trend of saying, when we get stressed in a work situation, many of us become defensive and closed. So many of us at work, when things get difficult, like clog up and become almost more haughty. So we change in all sorts of ways, or we could become more chatty, or we become maybe more even emotional. So you're about to get to work, guys. You need to pay attention, right? So how do we generate this team mindfulness? What we need to do is reverse the trend of this unconscious derailing of interpersonal relationships going down and becoming sour when we're stressed. One way to do this is to systematically and proactively talk about what typically doesn't get talked about in organizations. So, for example, the fact that when I get stressed, I start to speak louder and I start to accelerate. And I am not aware of this, but this might be perceived by other people as a threat. And so a way of accelerating the interpersonal safety and the interpersonal friendliness and care and concern and kindness is to share and reflect together what happens to people in organizations, for example, when they get stressed, when things become difficult, in order to anticipate when difficulty hits or when things, unexpected problems hit, such as what we have here, like difficulty that's at a mega scale, we discuss what happens to us. So can I ask here, and I have 1 minute left. Isn't that crazy how I am not mindful of my time, Jamie? I'm shouting at you. Can I get you to reflect with me and put into comments what happens to you, a really innocent example, when you are sleep deprived? What happens to you in your behavior with others when you're sleep deprived? Can we reflect on that for a little bit? And give us some comments here. Thank you, I've got some comments. I'm looking at the comments right now. Yeah, lovely. I see words such as irritable. Self-defending, I see, yeah. Crabby, yeah. Grumpy, yeah. Can I get you to look at the comments here and tell me what you're noticing? Can I get people to unmute themselves? What do people notice?
Sure, go for it.
So negative, Jutta.
Yeah. But they're different, aren't they? What else do you notice?
The quality of separation between people.
Yeah. Separation. People tend to separate. Yeah. And I need to accelerate this discussion now. Now, can I get you to almost shift your attention to imagining what would happen if we had these types of conversations in organizations more often?
Showing vulnerability and
yeah. Razia, you've got it. And Razia is the final comment for my presentation. You would change the quality of the conversation. And what would happen is we would start to make things discussable that are real, that are there, but that are normally not discussable, not mentionable. Fred Rogers says, what is mentionable is manageable. And so I need to leave you, but I need to leave you with the summary of what I've tried to talk about, which is team mindfulness develops by systematically making it safe and discussable through leadership and through care, and of course through careful management, right, of this opening up process, but of bringing to the surface what is here anyway. But if it is not managed, really derails our focus from what's important at work. I need to stop. Thank you, Jamie. Sorry for running over again.
Thank you, Jutta. A less professional timekeeping thing, but a very rich and very professional presentation nonetheless. Thank you. Much as we expect from you. Okay. Now I will hand over to Andrew, our last speaker, to talk about some practical tools and implications of what we've been discussing here.
Thanks, Jamie. Thank you so much to the other two speakers. I can't tell you how weird it is to be on this side of the table and not where Jamie is. It's very disconcerting. But thank you so much for inviting me, and it's lovely to see you all. I'd like to actually start where Jutta left, because I think you and the last two speakers have absolutely nailed it for me. This sense of the artificiality of the separate, and how important it is to be able to talk honestly in teams. And I just wanted to share a quote that one of the directors on the building safety program, who left slightly before me, said that she felt that the senior leadership team of the building safety program had been the most collaborative team that she had ever experienced. And she put that down to mindfulness. And so my presentation is going to be about how we got to that point, in essence. And a little bit about my journey to the conclusion as to why that was important. So my journey with this started on a course in Oxford called the Major Project Leaders Academy, and it's kind of like an MA. It had lots of intimidatingly efficient and scary program managers. And as a program manager, I'm very happy to tell you, program managers are terrifying and not terribly fluffy people. And so what has that got to do with mindfulness? Well, I went to this course, and on it was a gentleman called Paolo Catoni, who is a professor of accountancy. And my apology to any accountants out there, but I honestly saw his name on and the day and a half that we were going to spend with him, and thought I'd have to chew my leg off. But I was far from right, because he gave the most astounding presentation, and I would love to share lots of it with you, but I'm going to get in trouble with the timekeeper, and I don't want to be told off like Jutta. So in essence, his theory was that the Jesuits had invented double book accounting. I haven't checked that, I haven't verified it, but it's a good story if they have or haven't. And they did so for a reason. They wanted to create a mechanism by which they could reflect, that the head monk, I guess, and the accounting monk could reflect on the money coming in and the money coming out. And he said very profoundly, to me it felt profound anyway, that we have transformed double book accounting to being just about achieving the bottom line. What's in the bank. Not where it's come from, not where it's going, just what's in the bottom line. And he looked at all these scary project managers and said, that's what you do with your highlight reports. And I realized in that moment that I'd wasted 15 years of my life, because I had spent them partly producing incredibly professional packs of data and taken them to the executive board of the Ministry of Justice, among others, and said, this is what's going on with your programs. And of course, like any other human being, they go, some of them would have gone, that looks like somebody really professional has got a hold on that. Now next. And rather than bringing their awareness and the attention to what was going on, which was the entire purpose of a highlight report, the clues in the title, what I'd actually done was the opposite. I'd managed to produce something so professional that it distracted people. And it suddenly started to dawn on me. So I went up to Paolo at lunchtime and I said, I'm sorry to disturb you, but he said, no, this is the best bit. People coming up to you and talking to you at lunchtime. I said, tell me more about the Jesuits. And he said, the Jesuits used three things, and I can never remember the third one, but two of them was logic and meditation. And I nearly fell off my chair. And it suddenly made me realize that what the Jesuits were trying to do was bring awareness to what they were doing. And what started to emerge for me was that program management is potentially a mindful practice. That actually, if you look at what a program board is doing, what you're really trying to do, and again, to quote John Kabat-Zinn, if mindfulness, and I know there are other definitions and other ways to explore this, but if it is about present moment awareness, non-judgmental present moment awareness, then a program board is a group of people sitting around a table trying to be aware of some data at the same time in a shared way, and in an ideal world, possibly without judgment. and being able to come to it. Now, one might argue that the reason that, and this is a very subjective view, that the reason why the HS2 in the UK is going to be built is because I'm bored with judgment, but that's a whole nother conversation. The reality is, being aware is not often the case in a program board. People are on their mobile phones. If they're not on the mobile phones, they're thinking about the meeting and the argument they've just had, or the next argument they're about to have. They're just not there. They're just not present. So this synergy between the thing that I've been doing, and as Jamie said in the intro, I've been program manager for longer than I care to admit, and mindfulness, this shared present moment awareness, was incredible. So I had a mindfulness practice when I went to that course, and this all started to resonate. And then I went back to my job in the Ministry of Justice and thought I need to do something about this. But fast forward, because of the clock, I then had I was working for Transport for London at the time, and I got an email saying, can you come and help set up the building safety program? So I arrived in the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government two weeks after the Grenfell fire. And it was the most intense working environment that I'd ever experienced. It was a highly emotionally charged place, and it was an incredibly busy place with a lot of media and ministerial attention. And so I used my mindfulness practice to survive, frankly, for the first 3 months. And that's the only reason that I was able to get through those 3 months. And at the end of 3 months, I took my career to some extent to my hand, although TfL had very kindly kept my job open. So I was on a pretty safe bet. And I said to my boss, I want this to be a mindful program, fully expecting her to say, thank you so much for your time, Andrew. It's been lovely working with you. But she didn't. And to her credit, she said something much more insightful, which was, what does that mean? And that was a really powerful question for me. And so I just wanted to share very quickly what the model that we came up with to try to articulate it. Now, I want to make it very clear that this model was set up to try to articulate what I felt organizational mindfulness was for people who did not have a mindfulness practice or an understanding or a deep understanding of mindfulness. I had to pitch it, I had to sell it. But I also think that it worked. And I think it illustrates what I feel might be a helpful model for others to think about. So I said that this was about being mindful of the vision. So we had a big vision. Yeah, we were trying to make people in high-rise buildings safe following the Grenfell fire tragedy. So whilst we were being bombarded by media and other things, it was important to be able to raise our attention, to be able to raise our awareness to the goal that we were trying to achieve when we had an immediate deadline. That was crucial. We had to be mindful about delivery. We had to know what actions were going to help us to achieve this lofty vision, but on a very practical level. We also had to be mindful of each other. And this absolutely is to the points which have been discussed so far. We had to be connected in a place where people were at risk of falling over on a daily basis because of the amount of pressure that they were under. The connectivity, the ability to communicate honestly and openly, that ability to get to where the director said, this is the most collaborative team that I've ever worked in, despite being the most stressful, because of mindfulness. That's what made the difference. That's what made us a successful and a team. And very few people actually had to step away from the work. And I put that down to what we put in place. And we had to be mindful of ourselves. We had to be able to be true to the ideas of the oxygen mask. Now, we didn't get as far as I would have liked with some of the ideas that we could have brought into place. But one of the things which was critical to me was that we didn't just talk about mindful practice. We couldn't have suddenly sent everybody on an 8-week course. That just wasn't going to happen, even if we wanted to. It was more important to bring it into the very culture that we were trying to do. It was important to bring it into people, yes, in the way that we talked about mindfulness, in the way that we held team discussions, in the way that we introduced the concepts, and of course we offered training. But we had to talk about it in terms of processes. So how do we run our boards? How did we start our meetings? We always started our senior leadership teams with a short practice so that people were truly present. Looking at email protocols, I'll come back to that in a second. And products, looking at the highlight reports. So products for me as a program manager is things like product reports, risk registers, these sorts of things. How do you make the plans actually mindful? So the very boards that we had, for example, we brought people's attention to the risks that we were facing. We encouraged them to actually engage with what we were taking seriously in what we were considering. So as well as mindful practice, I suppose is my point, we were looking at embedding it in the very culture of the way that we ran the program, the way that we ran the organization. And so when we look at the situation now, And one quick anecdote, if I may. So there was one guy there. He was even older than I am, and he was one of the original team. So I had come in as this person who'd been coming to try and help the problem, and it wasn't a great relationship. Yeah, and he sat there in the senior team meetings for the whole time. And I always started the practices by saying, if you don't want to practice, that's absolutely fine. You can just sit quietly. And obviously there's a little bit of sort of ninja mindfulness, because what else are they doing other than being mindful, but it's fine. And so he would sit there, and I always got this impression of loathing, basically, and tolerance, you know, and we were very professional. Anyway, 2 weeks before I left the program, there was an away day, and he was sitting there with the other deputy directors, and I was in the audience, and somebody asked the question, how did you cope at the start when it was really intense? And he said, well, that's where the mindfulness came in. And I nearly leapt up and hugged him, you know, which would have been weird in a team away day. But it meant so much to me to see that what we had achieved was a cultural change. It had become acceptable for him to say that in front of 140 people. So just moving forward very quickly, because I feel a clock coming on. If we translate that to what's happening now, I cannot imagine a time, I couldn't have imagined this time at all, but I can't imagine where we are now as anything offering as much perhaps in way of helping us deal with the technological change and change to the way that we're working. So one of the interesting things that I've noticed with home working is in the past, if for example, somebody misses you out from an email chain, you can bump into that person at the tea point and say, you missed me out on the email chain. What's going on with that? I'm so sorry. So let me fix that immediately. It's done. It's gone. It's not a problem. Coming back to Jutta's point about conflict, now can't do that. Can't bump into them. I have to actually decide. I'm going to write to you and say, you missed me out. I've escalated that. We're in a conflict situation, or I've got to phone you up. Apart from the amount of stress that that's caused me, it's caused you, how much time has been wasted? So we're in a situation where our attentiveness, our mindfulness of the people around us, the way that we communicate, the way that we use the Zoom, the way we use email, the way that we use our mobile phones is absolutely critical to the way that we adjust and adapt to these new ways of working, which aren't going away anywhere soon, because even if we're able to move back to a more crowded office environment, I can see a lot of people and organizations benefiting from the fact that we can work virtually. So the idea of being truly mindful about the team, leading from what the previous speakers have said, being truly mindful of each other and engage with each other and working collaboratively and collectively, sensing how we feel and how other people feel, making that effort to do that collectively. I feel it's really of its time and offers us something of a way of helping with the new ways of working. And I'll leave it there.
On this to the second, Andrew. No reprimand necessary. Wow, that's a lot of information, a lot of great richness. This webinar will be recorded and available for you if you want to want to study it. And then there's a lot in there. As such, I'd like to suggest we all just take a pause for a moment, let all that settle with us, and maybe have a think about what you might like to know more about. We have 35 minutes or so roughly on time. So we have Mark's presentation, bringing in those domains of relationality, insight, and mindfulness, and the overlaps between those, a particular alchemy of bringing those together into one training program. We've got Jutta's, making what is mentionable manageable, looking at sort of trust and safety, and there's a lot more in there besides that, and then what you just heard from Andrew. So let's just have about a minute together, just sitting for a second. Okay, and when you're ready, just feel free to post into the chat if you have questions. What I'm going to do with those questions that I've already got, I'm going to invite you to give them to speak them, but I wonder whether we might actually sort of group them and let the speakers answer a kind of group of questions, so we can get voices into the room. So the first three are for, I think, probably just for Mark, because they're directly in response to his presentation. So as briefly as you're able, with an eye on the time and how keen I am to to keep things prompt. Yolanda, do you want to say what you posted to me about your question to Mark?
Okay. I think that in the presentation you say that well-being was a social function, and I think that I do understand the point of this, but also I would love to hear you connected this notion with eudaimonia, this idea of that all well-being comes from inside, like Marcus Aurelio also in Stoicism told about. I would love to have, because it's a question that it's always here in my mind, this social confronted with this individual thing in well-being. Thank you.
Thanks, Yolanda. And excuse me, one from quite a specific one from Mel. Actually, I can probably just say that, Mel, which is Mel's asked whether you can share the quote from Rwanda, which was really powerful.
Oh yeah, there's I mean, there's a reference there, and I can give you that reference. It's up the bottom of the slide.
Thanks, Mark. And then, okay, finally, Kate Reed, if you're able to add your question as well.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I thought that was fascinating talk. And what I was interested in is in terms of social mindfulness and working with that in organisations, you know, how did you sort of present that to them? I'm wondering how you came about, you know, having these conversations and trying some of these interventions. Did you try and sell it to them, or did it happen sort of organically?
I'm not sure if I should sort of deal with or respond to Yolanda first briefly, and then
however you'd like to do it, Mark. Yeah.
Okay. First of all, let's in order. Yolanda, I mean, I think that the simplest way of answering your question is, life is meaningless. There is no eudaimonia unless we are working for the greater good as individuals. And that's about being seeing ourselves as an interconnected part of the greater whole that's also supporting us. So I think the definition of it being, the notion of it being an individual thing is an illusion. And it's something that's come out of, you know, the hierarchical societal structures that have evolved since the making of the Lion Man of Holstenstadel Cave. 50,000 years of creating hierarchical structures have created a sense of separate self that is under status-related threat in society. In short, yeah, we're very much part of each other, and we need to work like that and recognize that.
Okay, thank you.
Kate, it's all about ducking and diving. And, you know, taking your chances when you can, and taking the opportunity to expand. You know, if you're cutting new turf, which is what I've been doing, is you've got to take advantage of those situations. You've got to build relationships, and it's a very, very long haul to get into those places. It's luck, it's persuasion, it's exploring ideas with people, it's finding connections in organizations that want to do this and discuss this, and then explore that with their colleagues. And then I was very fortunate to get into a position with the Royal Orthopaedic Hospital to get to a point where they agreed to run a comparison, waitlist control trial in the workplace, not the most perfect design, but it was a trial and they agreed to run it. And then we managed to get that data published. It's slowly chipping away at the boundaries of reasonableness, expanding the domain of acceptability through reasoned argument and explanation, and then putting it into practice. And then, if you can, getting ways of reporting it that establish it as part of a language that people begin to understand and accept.
That's great.
And it's a pioneering work that we're all involved with, that we have to do and take that responsibility if we're interested in it.
Mindfulness by stealth.
Well, I don't know that it's stealth. It's about changing opinions. If it was anything, it was about sexist language, we'd have to start saying it's not right to speak, to treat our female colleagues in this way, and you have to start arguing for that case. And it's exactly the same. You need to understand, develop a sophisticated explanation as to justify, to prove your case. Just like if you were learning calculus, you have to go through this laborious task of going through this rather interesting, convoluted process of proving it. Once you've proved it, you never need to use it again. You just press a button, so long as you know how to put it in place. And that's where we are we are with mindfulness, certainly in a social context. It's building that language and building that culture that goes, oh yeah, of course, that's how it works. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Mark. So Kate, you also had a comment about emotional safety, and Martin mentioned that he was curious about that, would like to hear more. Martin, did you want to elaborate on that? Where's Martin?
Yeah, great. Right. Can you hear me there?
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm interested in psychological safety in particular. So I've done some mindfulness with individuals in the nuclear sector, but I've also been looking with some of the leaders at, I suppose, how they can, partly for safety reasons, how they can tap into kind of what's happening around them at a lower level down the hierarchy. So really interested in areas of humility, inquiry, curiosity. So all those kind of characteristics coming through. And I suppose if people know the work by Amy Edmondson, the Fearless Organisation. So I think there's some interesting links through to organisational mindfulness, but I don't quite understand them all. It's kind of me trying to fathom out that space. But if anyone's got anything to feedback, either any of the speakers or anyone else who's started to look at the overlap between psychological safety and mindfulness, I'd be very interested to hear.
Thank you, Martin. Jutta, you seem to be poised to strike.
I'd love, yeah, Martin, you're absolutely spot on. Amy Edmondson is a mentor of mine, and she's a hero of mine. She's an incredibly accomplished scholar, and she's followed on from Edgar Schein's work of humility in inquiry in organizations. And she's, what we know, the construct of psychological safety is quite close to team mindfulness and of this humility and of this, care and like being concerned, kind, curious about others, but we don't completely know what the discriminant, the separation between those concepts are. Perhaps even more importantly than the intellectual disentangling of psychological safety versus team mindfulness versus psychological flexibility might be the how-to. And Amy Edmondson now is clear about saying she's done 20 years of work on psychological safety. Now our work, our generation of researchers and practitioners, is to how do we generate this in different contexts and in organizations where maybe life or limb is not quite so immediately at risk. And so it becomes more of a, less of a priority to be caring, to be concerned, to make space for each other. So she's given us a lot of work to do, but she's at least defined the outcome of, I think, what's very much, when you feel it, when it's there, it's beneficial. But how do we get into it consistently? Yeah, let's do some more work together on it. Thanks for raising it.
Thanks, Jutta. We've got another question for you, actually, from Razia. I've stopped grouping them now because I'm just struggling to kind of process them all. So one by one. Razia.
Yes, I have a question for you, Jutta, and with regards to when we talk about team mindfulness, because at the moment I just feel like, you know, with the work that I've been doing at GSK right now, I just feel like it's coming to where I've been working towards, and so suddenly there is this demand from leadership for the deeper dive, you know. So my question is, you know, when we talk about team mindfulness, my understanding is, my sense, my gut says, it is the deeper dive, the space of an, you know, 8-week program, but it's the space that we create for the leaders to actually have that conversation. And is that right?
I think if we're, if we really are talking about mindfulness in organizations, we need to talk about it as a multi-level thing, right? We need to talk about it as something that happens from the bottom up and from the top down. It's leadership, it's culture, it's my individual practice actually translating in how I respond to you and how I show up. If you have teenage children like you know that you don't always translate like your individual practice. Once you move into another social context, it goes out of the window. And my teenage children pointed out to me, quite humbling, that I'm not always as mindful in a social situation as I think I am personally. So it's something that if you want to embed it, like Andrew has done in his flowchart in organizations, it is like you say, needs to be a space for the leaders to have safety. But I think it also needs to be a space where the leaders have the emotional courage to lead with the vulnerability and the wholeness, and showing up and bringing their whole self to work, so that people below them in the hierarchy can feel that it's safe to also be more authentic, to be more whole, and say, I don't know. I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling confused. What can we do about this? And this is where we really learn and where we grow as organizations. But it's not, I think, not just a leadership development program, but it is almost having more honest conversations and more authentic conversations across the hierarchy. Using the models that Mark and Andrew, I think, have presented helps to create the framework, because it's a framework that has to go into several different levels and several different units of analysis. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Great, thanks, Jutta. And I'm now going back to the grouping method. So we've got 3 questions that I think Andrew either addressed to Andrew or mainly addressed to Andrew. So Lorraine, do you want to ask your question? I'm happy to read it out. You can.
Yeah, no, it just took a while to unmute. And I was just interested, Andrew, when you first introduced mindfulness into quite a dry program team, did you explain what it was that you were going to do, what it meant, and how did you then start the meetings with your mindfulness? Was it just a pause? Was it a moment? Was it a part of a practice? Was it 3-step? So yeah, the practicality aspect of it, please. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And the other 2 are also gearing towards the practical. So we've got Maria from Lloyd's.
Okay. In the virtual working world, how can we be mindful of the whole team and work collaboratively? This is actually coming up, that question is coming up all the time with team leaders, in our own team and other teams, where the leadership is very aware of the differences of having people in the office, where you see people and you get a sense, you get a feel, whereas okay, we have the team meetings 2 every week, but how much true insight is it really giving them? So that's their concern, my concern as well. And how would you integrate a new team member in this virtual world?
If I can talk about the virtual course that we've just been running, if you like a minute.
Yeah.
So it's been a lot of work turning a program, turning a program into a virtual program. And it's been specifically built around holding that team together, the UK Green Building Council. And I'm just pointing out that it has been entirely possible to do that, but it's not something that happens just because you go onto Zoom. You have to be very careful and build things up very carefully in order to do that. And I've been very fortunate to have a colleague to be able to do all of that, to facilitate a program which is at least a third, educational, at least a third interactive, and a small and a third mindfulness meditation practice. But we're combining those all together in an environment where you're teaching people to learn the discipline of describing experience without making evaluations of it to each other as a practice, and then coming to a point where people are willing to then where there's an agreement that they can start to now make sense of what's going on. So it's just breaking things up into small parts so that there's a great deal of care that takes place at each point in the process, from the very start of an hour and a half to the end of an hour and a half, with all of those bits in there. It's something we're all, I think, learning fast to do. And we've had fantastic results from it as well. Yeah.
Sorry, how do you get each member to be engaged? Because they're different personality types. Some are very open, they're ready to share, and others they just hold back, or they don't want to share. It's how to get.
It's mostly about using breakout groups and leaving people to, they all know each other already. And you're using breakout groups, you're building up language all the way through from the way in which the program's structured. So you're getting people interested in things. I mean, the first activity is talking about this picture. It's how do we start building language to describe how we're thinking about things, and beginning to build up things, and then the next activity is pictures of faces. So we start to build up language about describing emotions that other people are having and what they're thinking, and comparing the way we interpret things. So it's just good, if you like, good educational practice. It's nothing special in that respect. It's just applying it to teaching people about how they work as psychological beings in a social context, and how they can regulate their emotions, and how they can communicate, start to talk about what Jutta was talking about, when people are starting to learn the language of talking about what feels difficult, and then having a protocol where that's understood as being something that needs to be done and considered, and then observed, and then there can be a collective kind of process of making sense of that.
Okay, so I'm going to turn this over to Andrew, and this is sort of, I think probably answered just those, rather than add another question onto you, Andrew, because it's been a little while since those previous two. I'll stretch your working memory a bit too far. Is there anything you want to contribute to that online question and the previous one from Lorraine?
Yeah, thank you. So how to introduce it to a dry program team? The way that we did it was preparing in terms of how were we going to implement those 4 quadrants, and really thinking about it. Now I betray my program management background. So for me, this was an implementation program, and we had to think about it practically and logically. And then we launched it really at a team away day. So what we did was I stood up and gave a bit of an authentic story about why mindfulness was important to me, why it was important to my leadership journey, and why I wanted to bring it into the program. Now, I had a degree of advantage in that I was a director, so it was hard for people to laugh in my face. They may well have done afterwards. But I also had the even bigger advantage that I was supported by the Director General. So I mention that because I think it plays to Jutta's point around needing multiple layers. You need that senior buy-in to say, yes, we can do this. And then you need some courage, I think. It took some courage, certainly I'll put my hand on my heart, it took a lot of courage to stand up there and do that for a team of 140 people, you know. So that's how we launched it and introduced it, with a lot of honesty and authenticity. The point, just picking up on that multi-layer point, I think that you needed that groundswell of people and champions to start buying into it and think, yeah, we'll do some of this. Because else you would have had the advantage of the leaders doing it in isolation. And to some extent, I suspect that the leaders did benefit more because I spent more time with them and I was the person who was doing a lot of the mindfulness leadership, it was a mindfulness practice. But for it to be really embedded and sustained, it needs to have champions, because and of course champions leave. So you need to have people who are going to come in and pick up that baton. So you need multiple layers, absolutely. And then to the point about moving in, how did we practice? How do we actually do it so I use a 3-stage breathing space at the start of each meeting. And it would be no more than a minute long. And I would always be absolutely explicit that if you didn't want to do it, don't do it. And I'd sometimes make a joke, you know, like humor is important, yeah, because for people feel very uncomfortable with this stuff if it's new to them. And especially if they feel that it's being foisted on them. So it has to be, you know, engaging and disarming. So I would sometimes say something like, you know, compulsory mindfulness is not only hard to track, it's probably unethical. And then you know, it would kind of break the ice. So trying to do it in a very, very small way so that people didn't feel too uncomfortable. But people did it, you know, people just got into it. And if nothing else, they were just grateful to have a break for a minute, you know, just sitting quietly. In terms of how to approach the virtual world, well, for me, this is about structures. Yeah. So the thing, I think this is partly what some of the themes which have come out for me from this evening and listening to the other speakers is that, and certainly in trying to do this in the program, was that me having a mindfulness program on my own, a mindfulness practice on my own is great. And it has definitely helped me in all of my career since I've had it. But me doing it in isolation could be quite isolating, and it could be blooming hard to remember when it's all kicking off. But if you've embedded it in the way that you know, and it's part of your culture, and you are reminded in your team meetings, you know, if you have a virtual team, if we're in a team meeting now, for me as the leader at the end of it, say, just a quick note, when we're sending emails to each other, can we make sure that we're being as inclusive as we possibly can be? And think about the language that you use in that email, because maybe read it through and think, how am I going to receive that? Now, simple messaging like that from a leader may stick in your mind and remind you again and again and again. Now, is it you sitting on a cushion being mindful for 20 minutes? No. Is it a way of reinforcing the concept of bringing your attention to the people, to your connectivity of your team, and remembering they may feel very alone just now. They may be isolating, they may be shielding, who knows what's going on in their life. So make that connection and be aware of them. And when I say structures, I mean structures in communication, structures in policies, structures in even if you could have an email setting which said, read this through before you send it. However you want to build it into the structures, so you're actually supporting your classic mindfulness practice with an infrastructure so that it helps you remember, as I so easily do and I forget when I'm talking to my teenagers as well, Jutta. So yeah, I think it's structures to try and help us remember when it's easy to be distracted.
Great, thank you, Andrew. So we're coming to the last 8 minutes here. I'm going to hand it over to Mel, who had a question and then sort of changed it more to a reflection on what has been said. Mel, do you want to pick up on this thread?
Yeah, I think my question was it largely to Andrew initially. Obviously, we've been going down the route of voluntary introduction to mindfulness. So people coming along, listening to meditations, a short course, if they choose to do so. But what you did was introduce it as a whole. And there might be some people who just didn't want to come along. But reflecting on this, I'm thinking, is our approach largely bringing mindful individuals, but not a mindful workplace? And I'd just like to reflect on that a little bit, I think. I don't know if you've got any comments.
I was happy to leave you reflecting. I think that's I really think it has to, from my perspective is that participation has to be voluntary from an ethical point of view, apart from the fact that I don't know how I think you can kind of do it by stealth, by creating structures which make it hard for people not to be mindful. So starting the meeting with silence, people are going to pause. So whether they're doing a practice in the way that we might understand a practice is another question, but you can bring in things where there are some structures which can support it. But I think there is something about being overt. For us, there was something, I can only speak from my own experience. There was something powerful about being overt and saying, we as a leadership team want this to be a mindful place. And it might well have had something to do with the psychological safety angle as well, actually. That we were saying, we take, so I'll share this with you as well. I came down from that podium where I'd said that I'd had a moment in my life where it was very stressful and I discovered mindfulness and this is why it's important. And then I came off the podium and in the break, somebody came up to me and said, thank you so much. It's so important to have senior people talking about mental health issues. And I thought, oh my gosh, I haven't, have I? And of course I had. I hadn't actually intended to, but I had done. But what that signaled to everybody in the room was, one, the senior leadership team care. Two, we're doing something about it by putting in place a mindfulness ethic and structures and attitudes and trainings and all the rest of the infrastructure that I've described. And three, this is available for you to take part in. Do you want to? And then it came to the tipping point question, I think. And there was an engagement and an understanding that this was available. And so the culture then started to change. So I think that there's something to be said, if from my experience, that having the bold approach of saying, this is what we want to do and opening it up, and then having a program which kind of makes it available and makes it real and tangible, it then makes it possible for people to voluntarily engage and to reach that tipping point and to change the culture.
And did you find the culture changed over time, even the people who are perhaps a little bit resistant to it? See the changes.
Well, as I said, with the gentleman who was so supportive at the end, I really didn't think he was at the start. And I don't know, I didn't ask him, and I wasn't going to put him on the spot and say, oh, what do you think about this mindfulness stuff? I just got that vibe. But I think that at the start, there was undoubtedly skepticism, cynicism, a little bit of sniggering. And then over time, people benefited from it. Of course, it kind of makes its own case over time, doesn't it? And so I think, yes, it was a process. And again, a degree of courage. You know, I'm not bigging myself up here, but just being honest, bringing it to a group of people, you have to believe in what you're doing, yeah.
There's one point here that I think is really important, and it's like, I'm not teaching mindfulness as stress reduction. I'm teaching it as organizational change, and I'm doing it with an organizational consultant, and we're starting off from that point. And we're starting off with 45-minute appreciative inquiries with every member of the team before we go in and teach anything. We're setting it up very, very carefully. It's not about bringing a nice place for people to be quiet and get a rest or be mindful in an organization. I'm not saying that, I mean, that all I'm saying is, I think I came to the conclusion I wanted to be explicit about this being about change, not being about helping people cope. The language, the meaning, the understanding and why we're doing it is part of a process of a culture change that we've all got to work at, building at, I think.
Great. That's sort of edging us towards sort of summing up thoughts there, Mark. So I'd like to turn it over to our speakers for a kind of a minute each. There are still great questions that I haven't managed to get to. I might mention just a couple of them. I haven't really got time to turn it over to the speakers, to the questioners here, but there are two particular things which, one of which may have already been covered, but one from Matt Champion, who was asking to what extent do people need to do inner work first to create foundations? Like, is there a minimum level of some kind of capacity that will that will facilitate this? And there's another couple of different people mentioned the phrase insight dialogue and sort of like, you know, relational practices that are explicitly about speaking and listening. So yeah, either summing up in a minute or addressing one of those questions as a kind of goodbye, please. So first to Jutta.
Oh dear, can you hear me? Yeah, I've pressed something strange right now. That's wonderful. Thank you for mentioning those things just now. And I would like to actually do a shout out to Emma Donaldson-Felder, who's on the call somewhere, who's done great work on interpersonal dialogue. Emma, where are you? Is she still there? So that's really helpful also to talk about dialogue practices. Emma's work is very, very good about in that. I'm not certain, I think the jury is out on whether you need to have an inner practice to understand relational bits, or whether relational bits trigger inner awareness. I think the jury is out on that. Mel, what you said, I found very interesting, because I noticed that effectively what you were prompting us to talk about is what mindfulness in action really looks like in organizations. Being deliberate, bringing into consciousness what is going on. Mark and Andrew both have talked about this. This is our goal. We don't always need to be mindful and deliberate and slow and thoughtful. But if we want to have a mindful organization, and that's the norm, we talk about it, we demonstrate it, and then we change the norm. So I thought that was really lovely to prompt, to discuss what mindfulness in action looks like. Thank you.
Great, Jutta, thank you. Mark? Any final thoughts for us?
I think the overarching theme that I think I want to make is that we are not separate individuals. We are learning from each other. We're influencing each other, and we're influencing one another with how we think, how we behave, how we feel, how we regulate ourselves, and how we are kind to each other. And understanding with each other affects the dynamic of the group and the group's capacity to do whatever it needs to do for the collective interest. It's a story that has to change from the story of self-interest. And whether sitting meditation has anything to do with it isn't really that important. It can help be part of that equation, but it is not of itself, in my view, the most important part. Not that I'm ever going to say, you know, I personally want to sit for half an hour every day, but that's my deal, you know.
Very good. And finally, Andrew, we are over time now, so just be very, very. If you need to drop off, it's not rude. But go on, Andrew. Sorry.
So my final reflection, I suppose, is what an amazing group of people to be sat with, and that we collectively can make this happen. That there is enormous potential. If you hear the questions are, we are doing this, how do, you know, this is happening. There is energy in the community and outside the community to make this a reality in a world which desperately needs it, with people who are crying out for it. And it's just a real privilege to be part of this journey with you guys.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Andrew. And yeah, thank you so much for making this community possible with us, everybody. And like I said at the beginning, you know, intention really is to build opportunities to build community and network and relationships amongst you all. So apologies, this one had a little opportunity for sort of breakout groups, but we'll be returning to that kind of format in the future. And so just finally, thank you to our speakers, Jutta, Mark, and Andrew. I certainly learned a lot. I hope you did too. Take care of yourselves.
Thank you. What a joy to be here. Look after yourselves, people. Look after those in your care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Andrew.
Fabulous, Andrew. Thank you.
Speakers.